The scream came from deep inside the mountain, and every guard on the northern wall turned toward the sound at the same moment. Alpha King Cale Thorn was already moving before the second scream tore through the cold night air. His boots hit the stone steps two at a time, his chest tight with a feeling he had not known in years. Fear, not for himself. He had not felt fear for himself since he took the throne of the Thorn Pack a decade ago. This fear belonged to something else, something buried in the part of him that was not entirely a man. His wolf was awake, fully awake, and it was pulling him toward the sacred den beneath the fortress, with a force he could not explain. Nobody was allowed in that den. Not his generals, not his closest advisors, not even his own blood kin. The den beneath Thorn Castle had been sealed for 3 generations, ever since Cale's grandfather claimed it as the resting place of the first wolf spirit that ever walked these mountains. Warriors trained beside its outer walls. Elders told stories about it to frighten young pups into obedience. But no living soul had stepped past its stone threshold in over 60 years. So when Cale reached the entrance and found the ancient iron gate torn open, as if some enormous force had ripped it from its hinges, his heart slammed against his ribs. "My king, wait." The voice belonged to Doran, his second in command, a broad-shouldered wolf with silver eyes and a scar across his jaw from a border skirmish years ago. Doran caught up to him, breathing hard, 3 more guards trailing behind. "We do not know what is down there. It could be an enemy. It could be a trap set by the Draven Pack." "Then we will find out," Cale said, and stepped through the broken gate before anyone could stop him. The tunnel beyond was carved from black stone, cold and silent, lit only by strange veins of pale light that ran along the walls like sleeping lightning. Cale had seen this place only once before, as a boy, when his father brought him here on the night he turned 13. He remembered the way the air itself seemed to hum, the way his wolf had gone still and reverent, as if standing inside a temple. Tonight the hum in the air was different. It was not calm. It was alive. Cale moved faster, his senses stretching out ahead of him, searching for danger, searching for the source of the scream that had ripped him from his bed. He caught a scent he did not recognize, faint and strange, carried on the cold air like a whisper. It was not wolf. It was not human either. Not exactly. It was something in between, something old, something that made every hair on his arms rise. The tunnel opened into the great chamber, and Cale stopped so suddenly that Doran nearly crashed into his back. In the center of the chamber, curled on a bed of moss and pale stone, lay a woman. She was still, too still. Her dark hair spilled around her like a curtain, and her skin held a faint silver sheen in the strange light, as if she had been carved from moonlight itself. She wore simple travel clothes, torn at the sleeve, and there was dried blood on her wrist, though the wound beneath it looked days old, already closing. "Get her out of here," one of the guards said, drawing his blade. "This is sacred ground. No outsider has the right to lie here." Cale did not move. His wolf, the ancient presence that lived beneath his skin and had ruled his instincts since the day he was born, was doing something it had never done before. It was kneeling. Not literally, of course. Cale's body remained upright, tense, alert. But inside him, in that deep place where the wolf lived and breathed and made its own silent judgments about the world, something had gone down on its knees before this stranger, and it refused to rise. "My king," Doran said carefully, watching his alpha's face. Cale took a slow step forward, then another. The guards shifted, uneasy, hands still on their weapons, but none of them moved to stop him. He was their alpha. His word was law, even when his actions made no sense. He crouched beside the sleeping woman and studied her face. She could not have been older than 25, with a sharp jaw, dark lashes resting against pale cheeks, and lips slightly parted, as if she had been caught mid-breath and frozen there. There was no fear on her face, no pain, only a strange, deep stillness that felt less like sleep and more like something enforced from the outside. "Do you know her?" Doran asked. "No," Cale said, and that was true. He had never seen this woman in his life. He had never smelled her scent, never heard her name spoken in any hall, or market, or war council. And yet his wolf behaved as if it had been waiting for her for 100 years. He reached out, intending to check her pulse, to confirm she was even alive. The moment his fingers came within an inch of her wrist, his wolf surged forward with such force that Kale staggered back, gasping, as if something inside his chest had physically shoved him away. "Do not touch her." The words were not spoken. They came from somewhere beneath language, a command carved directly into his instincts, more absolute than any order he had ever given or received. Kale straightened, breathing hard, staring down at his own hand as if it belonged to someone else. "My king, are you hurt?" Doran stepped closer, alarmed. "I am fine," Kale said, though his voice came out rougher than he intended. He looked back at the sleeping stranger. She had not stirred. Her chest rose and fell in slow, even breaths, untouched by the chaos happening only inches away. "We should wake her," one of the younger guards suggested. "Ask her how she got past the outer wall. Ask her what she wants." "No." The word left Kale before he had even decided to say it. His wolf reacted violently to the suggestion, a wave of protective urgency rolling through him so strong that his vision briefly sharpened, the way it did before a shift. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to push the wolf back down beneath the surface, though it fought him harder than it had in years. "My king, forgive me, but this is not like you," Doran said quietly, stepping close enough that the others could not hear. "You have never let instinct override judgment, not once, in all the years I have served you. What is happening?" Kale did not have an answer. He looked down again at the woman on the mossy stone, at the strange silver light playing across her skin, and he felt something inside his chest twist tightly, like a rope pulled too tight. "Bring blankets," he said finally, "and water. She will not be moved from this den tonight. Post guards at the entrance. No one touches her. No one wakes her. Is that understood?" The guards exchanged uncertain glances, but none of them argued. Kale's tone left no room for debate. Doran lingered after the others left to fetch supplies. He studied his alpha for a long moment, his silver eyes narrowed with concern. "You know what the elders will say about this. A stranger inside the sacred den is not a small thing. Some will call it an omen. Others will call it a threat that must be removed before it grows into something worse." "Let them talk," Kale said. "And what should I tell the council when they ask why the Alpha King is guarding a woman he has never met, in a place no living soul is permitted to enter?" Kale was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the stranger's peaceful face. There was something achingly familiar about her, though he could not place why. It was like catching the edge of a dream just before waking, a feeling that slipped away the moment he tried to grasp it directly. "Tell them," Kale said slowly, "that the king has found something worth protecting, and that is all they need to know for now." Doran did not look satisfied with the answer, but he bowed his head and left to carry out his orders, leaving Kale alone with the sleeping stranger and the strange silver light humming softly against the stone walls. Kale settled onto the ground a short distance away, close enough to watch over her, far enough to respect whatever invisible boundary his wolf had drawn. He studied her features in the dim light, searching for some clue about who she was and how she had come to be here, past a sealed gate that had not opened in 60 years, deep inside a mountain fortress guarded day and night by some of the fiercest warriors in the Northern Territories. There were no tracks leading into the chamber. No signs of a struggle, no indication that she had walked here at all. It was as if she had simply appeared, the way morning mist appears on still water, without warning, without explanation. He noticed, as the hours passed, that her hand occasionally twitched, fingers curling slightly before falling still again. Once, her lips moved, shaping a word he could not quite hear. He leaned closer, careful not to touch her, straining to catch the sound. "Run," she whispered, so faintly he almost missed it. "They are coming. Run." Kale's blood went cold. He glanced toward the tunnel entrance, half expecting some enemy to come pouring through, but the fortress remained silent, its usual quiet broken only by the distant call of a night owl somewhere above the mountain. She was dreaming, or remembering. Either way, whatever haunted her sleep was severe enough to make even an unconscious woman flinch with fear. Kale stayed beside her through the long hours of the night, watching the strange play of light across her face, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing, feeling his wolf settle into a state of quiet, unwavering vigilance he had never experienced before, not even on the eve of his coronation, not even during the darkest days of the border disputes. Near dawn, Doran returned with blankets and a bowl of clean water, along with news that made Cale's jaw tighten. A patrol along the eastern ridge had found broken branches and disturbed earth, leading toward the mountain, a trail that seemed to originate somewhere in the neutral territory beyond Thorn Land, the very edge of the forest that separated their pack from unclaimed wilderness. Someone was tracking her, Doran said grimly, kneeling beside his king. Or something was chasing her. The trail is old, at least 2 days, maybe 3. Whoever she is running from, she outpaced them before she reached us. Or she led them away, Cale murmured, more to himself than to Doran. He looked down at the sleeping woman, at the healing wound on her wrist, at the faint lines of exhaustion still etched into her otherwise peaceful face. She pushed herself to the edge to get here. To get here specifically, Doran said slowly, testing the words as he spoke them. Not just to Thorn territory. Here, inside the sealed den. That gate has not opened by any hand in 60 years, my king. And yet somehow she stood before it, and it opened for her. The weight of that realization settled heavily over both men. The sacred den was not simply an old chamber of stone and memory. It responded to something. It had let this stranger inside, past a barrier that had denied every other living being for generations, and Cale's own wolf had bowed before her the instant he laid eyes on her sleeping form. Whoever she was no ordinary visitor. She was something the mountain itself had chosen to protect. We will keep her safe, Cale said, his voice quiet but resolute, carrying the unmistakable weight of a decision that would not be reversed. Whatever comes looking for her, whatever explanation she gives when she wakes, she stays under my protection until I say otherwise. Doran studied his king for a long moment, taking in the unfamiliar tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes never left the sleeping stranger, even as they spoke. Something had shifted in the Alpha King tonight, something Doran suspected neither of them fully understood yet. As you say, my king, Doran finally replied, rising to take his post at the tunnel entrance. But you should prepare yourself. Word travels fast in these mountains. By sunrise, every pack within 3 days' ride will know that the Alpha King broke 60 years of tradition for a stranger with no name. Cale barely heard him. His attention remained fixed on the woman before him, on the faint furrow of worry that occasionally crossed her sleeping brow, on the slow rhythm of her breathing that had somehow become the only sound in the world that mattered. Outside, the first gray light of morning began creeping over the mountain peaks, chasing the last shadows from the sky. Inside the ancient den, wrapped in silver light and unanswered questions, the Alpha King kept his silent vigil, waiting for the moment the stranger would finally open her eyes, and wondering, with a growing sense of unease, what kind of storm her waking would bring to his kingdom. He did not know her name. He did not know where she came from, or why his wolf had claimed her as something precious before a single word had passed between them. But one truth had already settled deep in his bones, unshakable and absolute. Whatever happened next, his life would never be the same again. As the morning light grew stronger, filtering faintly through cracks in the stone far above, Cale allowed himself, for the first time since the scream had pulled him from sleep, to sit back and simply watch her. There was a strange peace in her stillness that did not match the desperate warning she had whispered hours before. It was as though her body had made a choice to rest here, in this exact chamber, trusting the ground beneath her more than she had trusted anywhere else in a very long time. He thought of his grandfather's stories about the den, half-remembered fragments passed down through firelight and old songs. The elders spoke of a bond older than the Thorn bloodline itself, a bond between the first wolf spirit and a companion whose name had been lost to time. Some called it legend, some called it superstition, meant to keep young wolves from wandering into forbidden places. Cale had never given the stories much weight. Until tonight. Doran returned once more before the sun had fully risen, this time alone, his expression carefully neutral in the way it always was when he had something difficult to report. The council has heard, he said simply. Elder Wren is already asking to see you. She says this cannot wait. Cale exhaled slowly, glancing once more at the sleeping woman, before rising to his feet. Tell Elder Wren I will meet with her within the hour. And Doran, make certain the guards understand. No one enters this den without my direct word. No one. Understood, my king. Doran hesitated at the tunnel entrance, looking back at the still form on the mossy stone. Do you think she is dangerous? Cale considered the question carefully before answering, his eyes lingering on the stranger's peaceful face one last time before he turned to leave. I think, he said quietly, that she has already survived something far more dangerous than anything waiting for her here. He left the den with those words hanging in the cold morning air, his footsteps echoing down the stone tunnel, his mind already turning toward the difficult conversations that awaited him above. But even as he climbed the steps back toward the fortress, back toward the council chamber and the demands of his throne, part of him remained behind in that quiet chamber of silver light, unwilling to fully let go of the mystery he had found sleeping in the one place in his kingdom he had never expected anyone to be. Whatever answers the stranger carried, he intended to protect her long enough to hear them. Elder Wren was waiting in the council chamber when Cale arrived, her silver hair pulled back tightly, her sharp eyes narrowed with the kind of concern that came only from decades of watching packs rise and fall. She did not rise when he entered, which was unusual, a small sign of how deeply troubled she was. 60 years, she said without preamble. 60 years, that gate has stood sealed, and in one night, you let it swallow a stranger whole. I did not let it do anything, Cale said, taking his seat at the head of the long stone table. The gate was already broken when I arrived. She was already inside. And your wolf simply decided to guard her instead of removing the threat. Wren's tone was flat, but her eyes searched his face carefully. You know what that means, Cale. You know what the old stories say about a wolf that bows to a stranger without cause. Cale leaned back in his chair, forcing his voice to remain calm, even as something inside him tightened at her words. Enlighten me then, since apparently everyone in this castle understands what happened last night better than I do. Wren's expression softened slightly, though the worry never fully left her eyes. There is an old belief, older than your grandfather, older than the first thorn to rule these mountains. It says that the sacred den will only open itself for one purpose, to protect a mate the wolf spirit itself has chosen, when the natural world has failed to bring them together in time. The word mate settled over the chamber like a stone dropped into still water. Cale said nothing for a long moment, his jaw tight, his mind racing back to the strange pull he had felt the instant he saw her, the way his wolf had refused every instinct toward suspicion, and instead knelt before a woman he had never met. That is superstition, he said finally, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Perhaps, Wren allowed, or perhaps your wolf recognized something your mind has not yet accepted. Either way, the council will not be satisfied with silence. Rumors are already spreading through the lower halls. Some say you have brought a spy into the heart of our fortress. Others whisper that the Draven pack sent her to weaken us from within. She was running from something, Cale said. Not toward anything. There is a difference. Then you had best be certain of that difference before the other alphas hear of this, Wren warned. Because if word reaches Alpha Draven that the Thorn Pack is harboring an unclaimed wolf of unknown origin inside its most sacred ground, he will not wait for explanations. He will see it as an opportunity, or a threat, and either way he will act. Cale absorbed her warning in silence, his thoughts circling back, as they always did now, to the sleeping woman in the den below. He thought of the healing wound on her wrist, the desperate whisper that had escaped her lips in the depths of whatever dream held her captive. Run. They are coming. Run. Whoever she was running from, it was not a small matter. And if the Draven pack learned of her presence before Cale understood the full truth, the consequences could ripple far beyond his own walls. I need time, he said finally. Time to learn who she is, and why she came here, before this becomes a political fire I cannot control. Time is not something you have in abundance, Wren said, rising slowly from her seat. The council meets again in 3 days. If you cannot offer them a satisfying explanation by then, they will demand she be removed from the den, examined, and if necessary, exiled from Thorn territory entirely. I have held them off this long, out of respect for you, Cale. I cannot hold them off forever. She left the chamber without another word, her footsteps echoing down the stone corridor, leaving Cale alone, with the weight of her warning pressing heavily against his chest. He returned to the den as soon as his duties allowed, moving quickly through the fortress halls, aware of the curious and wary glances that followed him now wherever he went. News had indeed spread fast, exactly as Doran predicted. He could feel the questions in every glance, every whispered conversation that fell silent as he passed. When he reached the sacred chamber, he found Doran standing guard exactly where he had left him, and beyond him, the stranger remained exactly as she had been hours before, still, silent, untouched by the storm gathering above her in the halls of power. "Anything?" Cale asked. "She has not woken," Doran said, "but she has spoken a few more times. Fragments mostly. Nothing that made complete sense." Cale knelt beside her once more, studying her face in the pale light. Up close, he could see faint scars along her collarbone, old ones, the kind that came from years of hardship rather than a single violent event. Whoever this woman was, she had lived a life shaped by struggle long before she ever set foot in his territory. "What did she say?" he asked quietly. Doran hesitated before answering. "She said a name, several times. Ferris. And once, she said the word pack, followed by something that sounded like gone. I could not make out the rest." Cale turned the fragments over in his mind, searching for meaning in the scattered pieces. A name, a pack, and the word gone, spoken with what Doran described as unmistakable grief, even in the depths of unconsciousness. He thought of the old stories his grandfather used to tell, tales of packs destroyed by rival alphas hungry for territory, of survivors who fled through the wilderness for months, sometimes years, before finding safety. If this woman had lost her entire pack, if she had been running not just from a single enemy, but from the total collapse of everything she once knew, it would explain the desperation in her whispered warnings, the deep exhaustion etched into her features even in sleep. It would also explain why the sacred den, a place meant to protect what mattered most, had opened its ancient gate for her when it had remained sealed for everyone else for 60 years. "We need to know more," Cale said, half to himself. "About the Ferris pack. About what happened to them." "I can send scouts toward the southern territories," Doran offered, quietly, so as not to draw attention. "If a pack was destroyed recently, word will have traveled through the trade routes by now, even if it has not reached us directly." "Do it," Cale said. "But be discreet. I do not want the council learning about this before I have answers of my own." Doran nodded and moved to leave, but paused at the tunnel entrance, glancing back at his king, with an expression that mixed concern and something close to sympathy. "My king, may I speak freely?" Cale gestured for him to continue. "You have not slept. You have not eaten since yesterday morning. Whatever bond your wolf feels toward this woman, you cannot protect her if you run yourself into the ground trying to solve every mystery surrounding her in a single day." Cale managed a tired, humorless smile. Noted, "I will rest soon." Doran did not look convinced, but he respected his alpha's wishes and left to organize the scouting party, leaving Cale alone once more, with the sleeping stranger and the countless unanswered questions that surrounded her like a fog. He settled onto the stone floor beside her, closer this time than he had allowed himself before, close enough to feel the faint warmth radiating from her skin despite the chill of the underground chamber. His wolf remained calm, watchful, no longer surging with the frantic protectiveness of the previous night, but settled instead into something quieter, something that felt, disturbingly, like patience, like waiting. As the hours passed, Cale found himself studying every detail of her face, searching for answers he knew she could not yet give him. He noticed the way her breathing occasionally hitched, as if some memory disturbed her rest, followed by long stretches of calm that made him wonder if perhaps, for the first time in longer than he could guess, she was finally safe enough to truly sleep. That thought settled something restless in his chest. Whatever storm was building above him in the council chambers, whatever political consequences awaited him for breaking 60 years of tradition, he found he did not regret his decision. Not for a moment. Late in the afternoon, one of the younger guards arrived with news that made Cale's pulse quicken. A merchant caravan passing through the eastern trade road had reported strange activity near the southern border. Unfamiliar wolves moving in tight, coordinated patterns, clearly searching for something or someone. The caravan leader described them as tense, aggressive, unwilling to answer questions about their purpose. "How far from our border?" Cale asked sharply. 2 days' travel, my king. Maybe less if they move quickly. Cale's jaw tightened. 2 days. If these strangers were indeed searching for the woman sleeping in his den, and if they continued moving north at their current pace, They would reach Thorn territory far sooner than the 3 days Elder Wren had given him to explain himself to the council. Time, it seemed, was running out from every direction at once. He returned to the den with the news weighing heavily on his mind, watching the stranger's peaceful face with a growing sense of urgency he could not fully explain. Whoever was searching for her, whatever they wanted, he intended to be ready long before they arrived at his gates. "You are safe here," he murmured, though he knew she could not hear him, though he was not entirely certain why he felt the need to speak the words aloud at all. "Whatever you are running from, whatever waits for you when you wake, I will not let it reach you. Not here, not while you rest beneath my protection." The words surprised him even as he spoke them, a promise made to a stranger whose name he did not yet know, sealed not by logic or careful consideration, but by something far more primal, something that had taken root in him the moment he first laid eyes on her still form, in the silver light of the sacred den. Outside, the sun continued its slow arc across the sky, carrying the kingdom of Thorn one day closer to whatever storm was gathering on the horizon, and deep beneath the fortress, in the ancient chamber that had waited 60 years to open its gate again, the Alpha King kept his vigil, unaware that the true danger stalking his sleeping stranger was closer, and far more patient, than he could possibly have imagined. By the second night, the stranger's stillness had begun to change in small, unmistakable ways. Her fingers curled and uncurled against the moss beneath her. Her brow furrowed, then smoothed, then furrowed again, as though she were fighting her way through layers of memory that refused to let her go. Cale noticed every shift, every flicker of movement, sitting close enough now that his wolf no longer objected to his presence beside her. It was near midnight when she spoke again, her voice clearer this time, no longer the faint whisper of before. "Ferris, do not go back for it. Leave it, please." Her words came out choked, edged with panic, and her hand shot out suddenly, gripping at empty air, as if reaching for someone who was no longer there. Cale leaned forward instinctively, though he was careful not to touch her, remembering the fierce warning his wolf had given him the very first night. "They burned the western hall first," she continued, her voice trembling now. "Elder Sable did not make it out. I heard her calling for the young ones, and then the roof came down, and I could not reach her. I could not reach any of them." She gasped suddenly, her whole body jerking as if startled awake, though her eyes remained closed. Cale watched, frozen, as tears slipped from beneath her lashes and traced silent paths down her cheeks. Whatever memory held her captive, it was not a simple nightmare. It was the retelling of something real, something devastating, something that had clearly happened to her not long ago. "I am here," Cale said quietly, though he doubted she could hear him in whatever place her mind had retreated to. "You are safe now. Whatever happened, it cannot reach you here." Her breathing gradually slowed, the tension in her body easing bit by bit, though the tears continued to fall silently, even as she settled back into stillness. Cale remained beside her long after she had quieted, his mind turning over the fragments she had given him. A burning hall, an elder named Sable who did not survive, a companion named Ferris, someone she had cared for deeply enough to beg him not to risk his life for whatever he intended to retrieve. It painted a picture Cale did not want to believe, but could no longer deny. This woman had survived the destruction of her entire pack, likely within the past several days, and had fled across unfamiliar territory, wounded and alone, until instinct or fate or something far older than either had led her to the one place in the northern mountains capable of offering her true sanctuary. Doran arrived shortly after dawn, his expression grim, carrying news from the scouts Cale had sent south 2 days earlier. "My king, we found something. A burned settlement, roughly 3 days' hard travel from here, tucked into a valley along the southern ridge. The scouts say the fires were recent, no more than a week old. Whoever lived there did not have time to save much of anything." Cale's stomach tightened. Survivors? None found at the site itself, but the scouts tracked several sets of footprints leading away from the ruins, scattered in different directions, as if the survivors split up to avoid being followed together. Doran hesitated before continuing. "One set of tracks led north, toward our border. The scouts believe it belonged to a lone woman, moving fast, likely wounded given the uneven stride." "That has to be her," Cale said, rising to his feet, his mind racing. "Did the scouts learn anything about who attacked the settlement?" Only rumors picked up from a trader who passed through the area shortly before the attack. He mentioned unfamiliar wolves scouting the valley for several days beforehand, asking questions about the pack's numbers, their defenses, their alliances. The trader described them as calculated, patient, not the kind of attackers who strike on impulse. A cold, uneasy feeling settled over Cale as he absorbed this information. An organized, patient assault on a small, likely unprotected settlement did not sound like a random act of aggression. It sounded like something planned, something deliberate, carried out by someone with resources and purpose far beyond simple territorial conquest. Did the trader give any indication of who might be responsible? Cale asked. Doran's expression darkened further. He mentioned a name, though he was reluctant to speak it clearly frightened even at the mention. He called them the Hollow, a group that operates outside the usual pack structures, answering to no alpha, no territory, no code of conduct that the rest of us abide by. He said they take what they want and leave nothing behind that might identify them. Cale had heard whispers of the Hollow before, fragments of rumor exchanged in hushed tones at trade gatherings, stories dismissed by most as exaggeration or myth. If the Hollow were real, and if they had truly been responsible for destroying an entire settlement just days ago, it explained the desperate terror in the stranger's whispered warnings far better than any simple pack rivalry could. Increase patrols along the southern and eastern borders, Cale ordered. Quietly, I do not want to alarm the council before I understand the full scope of this threat, but I also will not leave our territory undefended if this Hollow group is indeed moving in this direction. Understood, my king. Doran paused, studying Cale's expression carefully. There is one more thing. The scouts found something at the edge of the burned settlement, a carved wooden pendant, half buried in ash, still intact despite the fire around it. They brought it back, thinking it might mean something. He held out a small object wrapped in cloth. Cale unwrapped it carefully, and found himself looking at a delicate wooden carving, shaped like a crescent moon, worn smooth by years of handling, with a small crack running along one edge that had clearly been repaired at some point, with careful, patient hands. Something about the pendant felt significant, though Cale could not immediately say why. He carried it with him back to the sacred den, settling once more beside the sleeping stranger, studying her peaceful face as he turned the small carving over in his palm. On impulse, he set the pendant gently on the moss beside her hand, careful not to make contact with her skin. The moment the wood touched the stone floor near her fingers, her hand twitched, then slowly, unconsciously, curled around it, drawing it close against her chest, as though some deep instinct recognized it, even through the depths of sleep. Cale watched, his breath catching slightly, as her features softened for the first time since he had found her, the tension that had gripped her expression easing into something closer to peace. Whatever the pendant meant to her, it clearly mattered. It clearly belonged to a life she had lost, a life she was still grieving, even in the depths of unconsciousness. He remained beside her through the rest of the day, watching the small carving rise and fall gently with her breathing, feeling the weight of everything he had learned settle heavily over him. A destroyed settlement, a group called the Hollow, organized and merciless, moving through the southern territories with clear purpose, a woman who had survived against every odd, only to collapse in the one place capable of offering her true protection. And somewhere out there, moving steadily closer with every passing hour, whoever or whatever had destroyed her home was very likely still searching for her, unwilling to leave any survivor capable of identifying them. As evening fell over the mountains, casting long shadows through the fortress halls above, Cale made a decision that he knew would draw criticism from every corner of his council. He summoned his most trusted warriors and began quietly preparing Thorn territory for a threat that had not yet arrived, but that he was now certain would come, and come soon. He did not know the stranger's name. He did not know the full story of what had happened to her pack, or why the Hollow had chosen to destroy it so completely. But he understood, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that whatever answers she carried, whatever danger followed in her wake, his kingdom was now inextricably tied to her fate. And he found, somewhat to his own surprise, that he did not resent that fact at all. If anything, the growing sense of purpose steadying his thoughts felt like the first solid ground he had stood on since the night her scream first pulled him from sleep. Late that night, as the fortress settled into quiet and the guards changed their watch along the outer walls, Kale sat beside the sleeping stranger one final time before allowing himself to finally rest. He studied her face in the dim silver light, the pendant still clutched gently against her chest, and found himself wondering, not for the first time, what her voice would sound like when she finally spoke his name, instead of fragments of grief and fear. Whatever came next, he intended to be ready. For her sake, and increasingly he realized, for his own as well. The council chamber was tense the following morning, the air thick with unspoken accusations, before Kale had even taken his seat. Word of the increased border patrols had spread quickly, as such things always did within the fortress walls, and the council members had drawn their own conclusions, long before Kale arrived to offer any explanation. "You are preparing for war," said Councilman Brandt, a heavy-set wolf with a reputation for bluntness that bordered on hostility. "And you have not seen fit to inform this council why." "I am preparing for a threat," Kale corrected, taking his seat at the head of the table. "One that may or may not materialize. Increased caution is not the same as war." "Caution does not usually involve doubling the watch along every southern approach," Brandt shot back. "Nor does it usually involve keeping an unidentified stranger locked away in our most sacred ground, refusing every request to have her examined or questioned." Elder Wren raised a hand, silencing the murmur of agreement that rippled around the table. "Let the king speak. There will be time for accusations if his explanation proves unsatisfactory." Kale took a slow breath, weighing carefully how much to reveal. He had spent the previous night considering exactly this moment, knowing the council would demand answers he was not yet fully prepared to give. But he also understood that continued silence would only deepen their suspicion, and he could not afford a fractured council, while a genuine threat potentially approached his borders. "My scouts discovered a burned settlement 3 days south of our territory," he said finally. "Recently destroyed, likely within the past week. The attack appears to have been carried out by a group operating outside normal pack structures, possibly the same group known in southern rumors as the Hollow." The chamber fell silent, the earlier hostility giving way to something closer to genuine alarm. Even Brandt's expression shifted, his skepticism tempered by clear concern. "The Hollow," murmured an older council member near the back of the room. "I had thought those stories exaggerated." "As did I, until my scouts found evidence suggesting otherwise," Kale said. "The woman in the sacred den appears to be a survivor of that settlement. Everything I have learned so far indicates she fled here after watching her pack destroyed, wounded, and alone, likely pursued for some distance before she reached our territory." "And you believe this justifies breaking 60 years of tradition regarding the sacred den?" Brandt pressed, though his tone had lost much of its earlier edge. "I believe," Kale said carefully, "that the den opened itself for her, not for me, not for any decision I made. Whatever ancient purpose that chamber serves, it recognized something in her that none of us yet fully understand, and it granted her sanctuary before I ever arrived to find her there." Elder Wren leaned forward slightly, her sharp eyes studying Kale with an intensity that made him distinctly uncomfortable. "You believe she may be your intended mate. That is what you are dancing around saying, is it not?" The chamber erupted into hushed but urgent conversation, council members exchanging glances and murmured speculation. Kale held Wren's gaze steadily, refusing to let the sudden scrutiny shake his composure, even as something in his chest tightened at the words spoken aloud in front of the full council. "I do not know what she is to me," he said honestly. "My wolf has behaved in ways I cannot explain since the moment I found her, but regardless of what bond may or may not exist between us, the more pressing concern is the threat that destroyed her pack, and whether that same threat intends to follow her here. And if it does?" Brandt asked, "Are we prepared to go to war over a stranger with no name, no proven allegiance, and no clear connection to Thorn territory, beyond whatever mysterious pull your wolf claims to feel?" "We are prepared to defend our own borders," Kale said firmly. "Regardless of who or what draws that threat toward us, that has always been true, long before this woman ever arrived in our territory. If the Hollow is indeed active in the southern regions and moving north, they represent a danger to every pack in these mountains, not just to Thornland specifically." A tense silence settled over the chamber as the council members absorbed this reasoning, several exchanging uncertain glances. Elder Wren finally broke the quiet, her voice measured but firm. "The king's reasoning is sound. whatever personal motivations may also be at play. A group capable of destroying an entire settlement without warning is a threat to all of us, not merely to whoever they pursue next. I propose we support the increased patrols and allow the king time to gather further information before any drastic action is taken. Several council members nodded in reluctant agreement, though Brant remained visibly unconvinced, his arms crossed tightly over his broad chest. And the woman herself? Are we simply to trust that she poses no danger, based entirely on the king's instincts and the sympathies of his wolf? When she wakes, she will be questioned, Cale said. Thoroughly, and with appropriate caution. I have no intention of extending blind trust to anyone, regardless of what my wolf may feel, but I will not have her dragged from the sanctuary that clearly chose to protect her, nor will I have her treated as an enemy before she has even had the chance to explain herself. The council reluctantly accepted this compromise, though the meeting ended with a palpable tension still lingering in the air, several members clearly unsatisfied despite the concessions offered. As the chamber emptied, Elder Wren lingered behind, waiting until the others had gone before approaching Cale directly. You handled that better than I expected, she said. Though you should know, Brant will not simply let this rest. He has ambitions of his own, and a crisis such as this, handled poorly, could provide exactly the kind of opportunity he has been waiting for. I am aware, Cale said grimly. Brant has made his ambitions clear enough over the years, even without a convenient crisis to exploit. Then be careful, Wren warned, not just of the threat approaching from the south, but of the one already sitting within these walls, watching for any misstep that might weaken your position. She paused at the chamber entrance, glancing back at him with an expression that held more warmth than her earlier sternness had suggested. For what it is worth, Cale, I do not think you are wrong about her. I have served this pack through 3 generations of alphas, and I have never seen the sacred den respond to anyone the way it responded to her. Whatever your wolf recognizes, I suspect it recognizes something true. Her words offered small comfort as Cale made his way back toward the den, his mind still turning over the political complexities now tangled with the more immediate concerns of the approaching threat. He found Doran waiting near the tunnel entrance, his expression carrying news that made Cale's pulse quicken before a single word had been spoken. She is stirring, Doran said. More than before. I think she may be close to waking. Cale moved quickly into the chamber, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. The stranger lay much as she had before, but her breathing had changed, quicker now, more shallow, and her fingers gripped the small wooden pendant tightly against her chest, as though bracing herself for something. He knelt beside her carefully, watching her face for any further sign of consciousness returning. Her eyelids fluttered, the faintest movement, and for one breathless moment, Cale thought she might open her eyes right there in front of him. But the moment passed, her breathing slowing once more, her body settling back into the deep, enforced stillness that had held her for 2 full days now. Cale exhaled slowly, disappointment and relief mixing uneasily in his chest. Not yet, he murmured, but soon. He remained beside her as the afternoon light shifted and faded beyond the mountain above, his thoughts circling restlessly between the political tension building within his own halls and the external threat gathering somewhere in the southern territories, drawing steadily closer with each passing day. Whatever answers the stranger carried, whatever truth would finally emerge when she opened her eyes, Cale understood now that the stakes extended far beyond his own curiosity or the strange, undeniable pull his wolf felt toward her. The safety of his entire kingdom, and quite possibly the safety of every pack scattered throughout these northern mountains, had somehow become tied to a woman whose name he still did not know, sleeping fitfully in a chamber that had waited 60 years to open its gate for exactly this purpose. He only hoped, as the shadows lengthened around him and the fortress settled into another uneasy night, that he would have enough time to prepare before the storm finally broke over all of them. She woke just before dawn, her eyes opening suddenly, as though she had been startled from sleep rather than gently released from it. For a long moment she simply stared upward at the stone ceiling, disoriented, her chest rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths. Cale, who had dozed off sitting against the chamber wall for the first time in 3 days, jolted fully awake the instant he sensed the change in her. He remained still, giving her space, watching carefully as her gaze swept across the unfamiliar chamber, taking in the strange silver light, the moss beneath her, the pendant clutched tightly in her hand. Then her eyes found him, and everything in her posture changed at once. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the stone wall, her whole body coiled with the readiness to fight or flee, though exhaustion clearly still weighed heavily on her limbs. "Stay back," she said, her voice hoarse from days of silence, but sharp with unmistakable warning. "Do not come any closer." Cale raised both hands slowly, showing her his open palms, careful to keep his movements unhurried and non-threatening. "You are safe," he said quietly. "No one here means you harm." Her eyes darted around the chamber again, taking stock of the exits, the guards she could sense stationed beyond the tunnel entrance, the general layout of a place she had clearly never seen before waking within it. "Where am I?" "Thorn territory," Cale said. "You are in the sacred den, beneath my fortress. My name is Cale. I found you here 3 days ago." 3 days, she repeated, and something like panic flickered across her face. 3 days, I have been unconscious, in unfamiliar territory, surrounded by strangers. Her hand tightened around the pendant, and Cale watched a flicker of confusion cross her expression as she registered its presence in her grip, as though she had not known she was holding it. "You arrived already unconscious," Cale explained. "The gate to this chamber had been sealed for 60 years. It opened for you, though none of us understand exactly why. My wolf would not allow anyone to disturb you while you rested." She studied him carefully, her sharp gaze assessing him with the wary intelligence of someone who had learned, likely through hard experience, never to trust an explanation too easily. "Why would your wolf care what happened to a stranger?" Cale hesitated, unwilling to burden her with theories about mates and ancient bonds, before she had even had the chance to fully process her surroundings. "I do not fully know yet," he said honestly, "but I intend to find out, if you are willing to help me understand." Her posture remained tense, though something in his honesty seemed to ease a fraction of her wariness. She glanced down at the pendant in her hand, and her expression crumpled briefly with grief, before she forced it back into careful neutrality. "This was my mother's," she said quietly. "I thought I lost it in the fire. My scouts found it near the ruins of a settlement 3 days south of here," Cale said gently. "I brought it back, hoping it might mean something to you." Tears welled in her eyes, though she blinked them back fiercely, clearly unwilling to show more vulnerability than she already had. "You know about the settlement then, about what happened?" "I know it was destroyed," Cale said. "I know survivors scattered in different directions, and that at least one set of tracks led toward our border. I do not know the full story, and I will not press you until you are ready to share it." She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable, before finally speaking again. "My name is Elira," she said quietly. "I was part of the Ferris Pack, in the Southern Valley territories. 3 nights ago, we were attacked. They came without warning, methodical, coordinated. They knew exactly where our defenses were weakest." "The Hollow," Cale said quietly. Elira's eyes widened slightly, surprised that he already knew the name. "You know of them." "Only rumors. Until recently. My scouts found evidence at the settlement that suggested their involvement." Cale kept his voice steady, though the confirmation of the Hollow's presence in the Southern Territories settled uneasily in his chest. "I would understand if you are not ready to speak further about what happened, but anything you can tell me may help protect Thorn Territory, should they continue moving in this direction." Elira was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant, clearly wrestling with memories she had not yet fully processed. When she finally spoke again, her voice was steadier, though the pain beneath it remained unmistakable. "They wanted something," she said. "Not just territory, not just conquest. They were searching for something specific within our settlement, tearing through the elder halls first, as though they knew exactly where to look. I do not know what they were searching for. My alpha never told the pack the full truth about what we protected." "Protected?" Cale asked carefully. "There were old stories," Elira said, her fingers tightening around the pendant. "About an artifact passed down through generations of Ferris leadership, something tied to the founding of our pack centuries ago. Most of us dismissed it as legend, the way most old stories eventually become legend. But the Hollow did not seem to be operating on legend. They seemed to know exactly what they wanted, and exactly where to find it." Cale's mind raced, connecting this new information to the fragments he had already gathered. An organized, patient assault, searching specifically for an artifact tied to an ancient founding story. It painted a picture far more calculated than simple territorial aggression, suggesting a deeper purpose behind the Hollow's movements that extended well beyond a single destroyed settlement. "Did they find what they were looking for?" he asked. "I do not know," Elira admitted. "I was not with the elders when the attack began. I was on the Eastern Watch, and by the time I reached the main hall, it was already burning. I tried to help who I could, but..." Her voice broke slightly, and she pressed her lips together, fighting for composure. "There was nothing left to save. I ran because there was nothing else I could do, and because I could hear them calling for survivors, hunting anyone who managed to escape." "And Ferris?" Cale asked gently, remembering the name Doran had reported hearing her speak in her sleep. "You called for someone by that name, while you slept." Grief flashed sharply across her face, raw and unguarded for just a moment, before she forced it back into control. "My brother," she said quietly. "He went back for our mother's pendant, even after I begged him not to. I do not know if he made it out. I searched for him for as long as I dared, but eventually, the smoke and the danger forced me to run, and I have not seen him since." The pain in her voice was unmistakable, and Cale felt his wolf respond with a fierce, protective ache that startled him with its intensity. He wanted, more than he had wanted almost anything in recent memory, to ease the grief written so plainly across her features, though he knew there was little he could offer beyond patience and honesty. "I am sorry," he said quietly, "for everything you have lost." Elira studied him carefully, her sharp eyes searching his face for any sign of insincerity, and apparently finding none. Some of the tension eased from her shoulders, though wariness still lingered clearly in her posture. "Why does the Alpha King himself sit vigil over an unclaimed stranger for 3 days?" she asked. "You could have simply had me removed, questioned by your guards, treated as the potential threat I very well might be." "My wolf would not allow it," Cale admitted. "From the moment I found you, it refused every instinct toward suspicion. I do not fully understand why, but I have learned to trust my wolf's instincts over the years, even when they defy easy explanation." Something shifted in Elira's expression, a flicker of recognition that surprised him, though she quickly masked it behind careful neutrality. "That is not a small thing to admit," she said quietly, "especially to a stranger you know nothing about." "Perhaps," Cale said, "but I find myself more interested in understanding you than in maintaining careful distance." A faint, wary smile touched the corner of her mouth, the first genuine expression he had seen from her since she woke. "That is either very brave or very foolish, Alpha King." "Perhaps it is both," Cale said, and for the first time since the scream had first pulled him from sleep 3 nights ago, he allowed himself to fully believe that whatever came next, whatever storm the Hollow's continued search might bring to his borders, he would face it with Elira beside him, rather than as a mystery he had simply chosen to protect. The sacred den, silent witness to 60 years of tradition finally broken, seemed to hum faintly around them, as though it too recognized the significance of the moment unfolding within its ancient walls. Elira's recovery over the following days was faster than anyone expected, her wolf strength reasserting itself once she had proper food, rest, and the security of walls that no longer trembled with the threat of fire. Cale watched her regain her strength with a mixture of relief and growing concern, aware that every day she spent healing was also a day the Hollow drew closer, still searching, he suspected, for whatever the Ferris pack had failed to surrender before their destruction. He found her on the 5th morning, standing at the edge of the training grounds, watching a group of young warriors practice their forms with sharp, assessing eyes. She had exchanged her torn travel clothes for simple thorn attire, and though shadows of exhaustion still lingered beneath her eyes, she moved with the quiet confidence of someone regaining control over her own body after days of enforced stillness. "You should be resting," Cale said, coming to stand beside her. "I have rested enough," Elira replied, not taking her eyes off the training warriors. "Lying still, while a threat gathers strength, somewhere beyond these walls, does not feel like healing. It feels like waiting to be found." Cale understood the sentiment more than he cared to admit. "Doran tells me you asked to review our border defenses yesterday." "I did," she said. "Your patrols are thorough, but there are gaps along the eastern ridge that a coordinated group could exploit, especially at night." The Hollow prefers exactly that kind of opportunity. You sound as though you have studied them closely. Elira's expression tightened slightly. I spent 3 nights running through unfamiliar wilderness with people who move like shadows and strike without warning. I learned quickly, out of necessity. Kale studied her profile, the sharp intelligence in her eyes as she continued observing the training grounds, already calculating strengths and weaknesses in his warrior's technique without being asked. It struck him, not for the first time, how much strength lived beneath the grief she carried, how thoroughly she had already begun rebuilding herself despite everything she had lost. "There is something you should know," he said carefully. "My scouts intercepted a rider passing through neutral territory yesterday evening. He was asking questions in the border villages, offering coin for information about a woman matching your description." Elira's entire posture went rigid, her hand instinctively moving toward the pendant she now wore on a cord around her neck. "Did the villagers give him anything?" "No," Kale said. "My scouts made certain of that before he could learn much. But it confirms what we suspected. The Hollow has not abandoned their search. If anything, they seem to be narrowing their focus toward our territory specifically." "They will not stop," Elira said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of hard-won certainty. "Not until they have what they came for, or until every possible witness who might identify them has been silenced. Then we prepare accordingly," Kale said. "I have already increased patrols and reinforced the eastern ridge based on your assessment. But I need to understand more about what they are searching for, if we are to anticipate their next move, rather than simply reacting to it." Elira was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant, before she finally spoke again. "There was a chamber beneath our elder hall," she said slowly. "Sealed, much like your sacred den, accessible only to the ruling family. My Alpha never explained its full purpose, only that it held something important to our founding, something meant to remain hidden, unless great need required otherwise." "Do you believe the Hollow found it?" "I do not know," Elira admitted. "The Elder Hall was the first structure to burn, and burned most completely. If whatever they sought was hidden there, they may have already recovered it. Or they may still be searching, which would explain why they continue hunting survivors, hoping one of us knows something that could lead them to it." Kale's mind turned over this new information carefully, weighing its implications. If the Hollow had already recovered whatever they sought, their continued search for survivors would be purely about eliminating witnesses, a threat serious enough on its own. But if they had not yet succeeded, and believed Elira or another survivor might hold knowledge that could lead them to their prize, the danger multiplied considerably, drawing them ever more persistently toward Thorn territory. "We will find out which possibility is true," Kale said. "But regardless of the answer, you remain under my protection, for as long as you require it." Elira turned to face him fully for the first time since their conversation began, her sharp eyes studying his expression with careful scrutiny. "Why?" she asked directly. "You have known me less than a week. I have brought potential war to your doorstep, drawn the attention of a group capable of destroying an entire settlement without warning, and offered you nothing in return, beyond fragments of a story I barely understand myself. Why continue protecting me, Alpha King, when every rational calculation suggests you should distance yourself from my troubles entirely?" Kale considered his answer carefully, aware that whatever he said next would shape the trust building slowly between them. "Because my wolf recognized something in you, before either of us understood why," he said honestly, "and because I do not believe protecting the vulnerable should require a rational calculation of personal benefit. You survived something no one should have to survive, Elira. That alone would be reason enough to offer you sanctuary, regardless of what threat follows in your wake." Something shifted in her expression, softening slightly despite the wariness she still clearly carried. "Most alphas would not share that view," she said quietly. "Then perhaps most alphas are mistaken," Kale replied, and found himself rewarded with the faint, genuine smile that seemed to come more easily to her with each passing day. Their conversation was interrupted by Doran's approach, his expression carrying the particular tension that always accompanied urgent news. "My king, forgive the interruption. A messenger has arrived from Alpha Draven's territory, requesting immediate audience regarding rumors he has heard about recent events within Thorn lands." Kale's jaw tightened. Word had traveled even faster than he feared, and Alpha Draven's interest in the situation was rarely a positive development for anyone involved. "Send him to the main hall," I will speak with him shortly. As Doran departed to relay the message, Illyra watched Kale's expression carefully, reading the tension there, with the sharp perceptiveness he was quickly learning defined her. Trouble? She asked. Alpha Draven has never needed much excuse to interfere in Thorn affairs, Kale said grimly. If he has heard rumors about the situation surrounding you, he will look for any opportunity to exploit the uncertainty, whether through political pressure or something more direct. Then perhaps I should not remain hidden away in your fortress, Illyra said, her tone carrying a note of steel that Kale suspected reflected the leader she might have become, had her pack survived to see her grow into that role. If Draven's messenger has questions, perhaps it is time I answered them myself, rather than leaving you to manage the consequences of my presence alone. Kale studied her for a long moment, weighing the risk of exposing her directly to outside scrutiny, against the strength and clarity he could see building in her with each passing day. Are you certain? I have hidden long enough, Illyra said firmly. Whatever comes next, whatever threat continues to hunt me, I would rather face it standing beside you than remain a mystery others speculate about from behind closed doors. Something in her words, in the quiet determination behind them, settled deeply into Kale's chest, reinforcing the certainty that had been building in him since the very first night he found her sleeping in the sacred den. Whatever bond his wolf had recognized before either of them fully understood it, it was proving itself, with each passing day, to be built on far more than simple instinct. Together they made their way toward the main hall, prepared to face whatever political storm Alpha Draven's messenger had brought with him, united now not merely by circumstance, but by a growing partnership neither of them had expected, yet neither seemed inclined to question. Behind them, the mountain stood silent and watchful, the sacred den beneath its stone foundation, holding its ancient secrets close, waiting to see what would unfold next within the kingdom it had chosen to protect. Alpha Draven's messenger turned out to be a lean, sharp-featured wolf named Corin, whose polite manner did little to disguise the calculating intelligence behind his eyes. He bowed formally upon Kale's entrance to the main hall, though his gaze shifted immediately, curiously, toward Illyra standing at Kale's side. Alpha King Thorn, Corin said smoothly. Alpha Draven sends his regards, and his concern. Rumors have reached his territory of unusual activity within your borders. Increased patrols, a sealed chamber opened after 60 years, and now, it seems, the source of that rumor stands before me in person. Alpha Draven's concern is noted, Kale replied evenly, though I fail to see how internal Thorn matters require his attention. Internal matters remain internal, only so long as they stay contained, Corin said, his tone still pleasant, but carrying an unmistakable edge. Word has already spread, of a survivor from a destroyed southern settlement, seeking refuge in your territory. If that settlement was indeed attacked by the group known as the Hollow, as rumor suggests, then this is no longer merely a Thorn concern. Every pack within these mountains has a stake in understanding the threat. Illyra stepped forward slightly before Kale could respond, her posture composed despite the scrutiny directed her way. I am the survivor you speak of, she said clearly. My name is Illyra, formerly of the Ferris Pack. I would be glad to share what I witnessed, if it helps other packs prepare against the same threat that destroyed my home. Corin studied her with open interest, his earlier calculation shifting into something more genuinely curious. Alpha Draven will be pleased to hear such candor. Perhaps you would consider traveling to his territory directly, to share your account in person. She will remain here, Kale said firmly, before Illyra could respond, under Thorn protection, where her safety can be properly ensured. Corin's expression flickered with something Kale could not immediately place, gone too quickly to fully read. Of course, Alpha King. I meant no offense by the suggestion. Alpha Draven simply wishes to understand the full scope of the threat, given its potential to affect all our territories. The conversation continued for some time, Corin asking careful, probing questions about the settlement's destruction, the Hollow's methods, and the artifact Illyra believed they sought. Kale watched the exchange closely, his instincts prickling with unease he could not fully justify, though nothing in Corin's manner offered concrete reason for suspicion. It was only after the messenger departed, promising to relay their account back to Alpha Draven, that Doran approached Kale with troubled news that crystallized his earlier unease into something far more concrete. My king, I recognize something during the messenger's visit that concerns me, Doran said quietly, drawing Kale aside from the departing guards. Corin's scent. I have smelled it before. Faintly, near the eastern ridge 3 nights past, close to where our patrols reported unusual activity. Kale's blood ran cold. You believe Draven's messenger was scouting our defenses before his official visit? I cannot be certain, Doran admitted. But the coincidence troubles me deeply. If Draven sent scouts ahead of any formal approach, it suggests his interest in this situation runs deeper than simple concern for regional safety. Kale's mind raced through the implications, uneasy conclusions forming faster than he could fully examine them. If Alpha Draven had learned of Alira's presence, and the artifact the Hollow sought before any official word had reached him through proper channels, it meant someone within Thorn territory had already been sharing information, likely for some time. We may have a spy within our own walls, Kale said grimly. Doran's expression darkened further. I suspected as much, though I hoped I was wrong. Few outside your most trusted circle knew the full details surrounding Alira's arrival, before Draven's messenger somehow arrived with knowledge that closely matched our private council discussions. The revelation settled heavily over both men, the implications troubling far beyond the immediate concern of Draven's interference. If someone within Thorn's own council or guard had been passing information outward, the danger extended well beyond simple political maneuvering. It suggested a vulnerability that could be exploited far more dangerously, should the Hollow themselves gain access to the same internal information. Keep this between us for now, Kale instructed. I do not want to alert whoever is responsible before we have identified them. Watch the council closely. Note who has access to sensitive information, and who among them has shown any unusual behavior in recent days. Understood, my king. Doran hesitated before adding, there is one more thing. Councilman Brandt requested a private audience with Draven's messenger before his departure. I only learned of it after the fact, from one of the hall attendants. Kale's jaw tightened at this new piece of the puzzle. Brandt's ambitions were well known throughout the council, his frustration with Kale's leadership decisions increasingly vocal in recent days. A private meeting with Alpha Draven's messenger, conducted without Kale's knowledge, suggested motivations that extended well beyond simple political disagreement. Watch him closely, Kale said, but carefully. I want proof before I move against a sitting council member, not mere suspicion built on circumstantial timing. That evening, Kale found Alira in the fortress library, poring over old maps of the southern territories, her expression tight with concentration, as she traced possible routes the Hollow might have taken in their search. He settled into the seat across from her, weighing carefully how much to share about the concerning developments Doran had uncovered. You look troubled, Alira observed, not looking up from the map before her. I have reason to believe someone within my own walls has been sharing information with Alpha Draven, Kale admitted. Possibly, regarding your presence here, and the artifact the Hollow seeks. Alira's head snapped up, her sharp eyes immediately alert. That would explain how his messenger arrived with such specific questions, she said slowly. I noticed it too. He knew details that should not have traveled beyond your private council discussions. You suspected as well? I have learned to notice such things, Alira said grimly. The difference between genuine curiosity and calculated knowledge is not always obvious, but it is there if you know to look for it. Corin's questions felt too precise, too specifically aimed, for someone simply relaying general rumors. Kale studied her, appreciating anew the sharp instincts that had clearly kept her alive through circumstances that would have overwhelmed many others. If there is a spy within Thorn walls, it complicates everything. We cannot trust that our defenses, our plans, remain truly private, which gives the Hollow, and potentially Draven as well, an advantage we cannot afford. Then we adjust accordingly, Alira said, her tone carrying the steady determination he had come to recognize as fundamental to her character. We limit sensitive information to only those we trust completely, and we set careful traps for whoever might be listening in on discussions meant to remain private. You have done this before, Kale observed. Manage threats from within. I mean, not simply from outside enemies. A shadow crossed Alira's expression. My pack faced internal disputes long before the Hollow ever attacked us. Not every threat comes wearing an enemy's face, Kale. Sometimes the greatest danger comes from those we trusted enough to let close. The weight of her words lingered between them, a quiet acknowledgement of shared understanding that went beyond simple strategic planning. Kale found himself studying her more closely, recognizing in her guarded expression the same hard-won wisdom that experience had carved into his own leadership over the years. "We will find whoever is responsible," he said firmly. "And we will ensure Thorn territory remains secure, both from external threats and from betrayal within our own walls." Alira met his gaze steadily, something like genuine trust beginning to settle into her expression, despite the danger surrounding them both. "Then let us begin," she said, "together." Outside the library windows, the mountain peaks darkened against the evening sky, the fortress settling into another uneasy night. But within its walls, a new alliance was quietly forming, one built not merely on the mysterious bond Kale's wolf had recognized from the very first moment, but on genuine partnership forged through shared purpose and mutual respect. Whatever storm continued gathering beyond their borders, whatever betrayal lurked within their own walls, Kale found himself increasingly certain that facing it alongside Alira gave him a strength he had not fully possessed before her arrival, a strength that would prove essential in the difficult days he sensed were rapidly approaching. The warning came at midnight, carried by a young scout whose face was pale with exhaustion and urgency as he burst into the fortress gates, nearly collapsing before Doran caught him. "They are here," he gasped, moving through the eastern ridge, dozens of them, spreading through the tree line like smoke. Kale was already moving before the scout finished speaking, his blood running cold with the confirmation of what he had feared since the burned settlement first came to light. "How far?" "Perhaps 2 hours, my king, if they maintain their current pace. They are moving carefully, avoiding the main patrol routes, clearly aware of where our defenses are strongest." The precision of their approach only confirmed what Alira had warned him about days earlier. The Hollow did not strike blindly. They studied their targets, waited for optimal opportunity, and struck with calculated efficiency that left little room for error on the defender's part. Kale found Alira already awake when he reached the chambers she had been given, her expression tense but composed, as though some instinct had already warned her that the moment she dreaded was finally arriving. "They are close," she said, not a question. 2 hours, perhaps less, Kale confirmed. "I need you to remain within the fortress walls, protected by our strongest guards, while we prepare our defenses." "No." Alira's refusal came immediately, firm and unwavering. "I have spent days learning your border layout, your patrol patterns, the specific weaknesses the Hollow is most likely to exploit. I can help coordinate the defense far more effectively from the field than from behind locked doors. Alira, if they capture you, if they capture me, they will kill me regardless of where I hide," she interrupted, her sharp eyes holding his steadily. "The Hollow does not take prisoners for negotiation, Kale. I have seen enough of their methods to know that survival depends on preventing them from reaching me at all, not on hoping locked doors will hold against dozens of coordinated attackers." Kale wanted desperately to argue, every protective instinct his wolf possessed screaming against the idea of Alira anywhere near the coming confrontation. But he also recognized the truth in her words and the fierce determination in her expression that reminded him she was no fragile survivor waiting passively for rescue, but a warrior in her own right, forged by circumstances that would have broken someone less resilient. "Stay close to Doran," he said finally, knowing the compromise was the best he could achieve, given the limited time remaining. "And if the situation turns against us, you retreat to the sacred den immediately. Whatever protection that chamber offered you before, it may prove essential again." Alira nodded, accepting the compromise, and together they moved quickly toward the war room, where Kale's most trusted commanders were already gathering, alerted by the urgent bells now ringing throughout the fortress. Maps were spread across the central table, patrol routes marked and adjusted as new information arrived from scouts positioned along the approach. "They are splitting into 3 groups," reported one commander, tracing routes across the map with quick, precise movements. "One moving directly toward the main gate, likely as a distraction. The other 2 are circling toward the eastern and western approaches, probably intending to breach the walls simultaneously, while our attention is divided." "Classic Hollow tactics," Alira confirmed, studying the map with the same sharp focus Kale had witnessed her apply to every challenge since her arrival. "They will expect us to concentrate our forces at the main gate, believing it to be the primary threat. If we can identify which of the flanking groups carries their strongest fighters, we can concentrate our real defense there instead." Based on the settlement attack pattern my scouts documented, Kale said, tracing his own line across the map, the Hollow typically leads with their most capable fighters on whichever approach offers the least resistance. If our eastern wall has historically been considered our weakest point, that is likely where they intend their true assault. The commanders exchanged glances, quickly calculating the implications. The eastern wall has indeed always been our most vulnerable approach, one confirmed. Fewer natural defenses, more open ground for a coordinated assault. Then we reinforce it heavily, Kale decided, while maintaining sufficient presence at the main gate and western approach to prevent either from becoming an unexpected weakness. Doran, take command of the eastern defense personally. I want our strongest fighters positioned there before the Hollow arrives. As the commanders dispersed to relay orders and position their forces, Kale turned to find Alira studying him with an expression he could not immediately read, something between admiration and concern. You trust my assessment of their tactics, she observed. You survived their attack, Kale said simply. You understand their methods better than anyone else within these walls. It would be foolish not to trust that knowledge, regardless of how recently we met. A faint smile touched her lips, quickly replaced by the seriousness the situation demanded. Then let us hope that knowledge is enough to prevent Thorn territory from suffering the same fate as my home. The next hour passed in tense preparation. Warriors positioning themselves along the fortified walls, weapons checked and rechecked, the entire fortress humming with the particular quiet intensity that always preceded battle. Kale moved among his forces, offering steady reassurance where he could, his own nerves carefully controlled despite the fierce protective urgency his wolf continued to press against his composure. Alira remained close to Doran as promised, though her attention never wavered from the eastern approach, her sharp eyes scanning the darkness beyond the walls for the first signs of movement. When the attack finally came, it arrived with the terrible precision she had warned them to expect. Shadows detached themselves from the tree line along the eastern approach, moving with disciplined coordination that spoke of extensive training and ruthless purpose. Kale's warriors held their positions, waiting for his signal, tension coiling through the fortified wall like a held breath. Steady, Kale called out, watching the approaching figures resolve into clearer shapes as they drew closer. Wait for my mark. The Hollow's fighters moved with unsettling silence, no war cries, no announcement of intent, simply relentless forward momentum that made the coming confrontation feel less like a battle and more like the approach of some inevitable natural disaster. Kale felt Alira tense beside him, her hand moving instinctively toward the blade she had insisted on carrying despite her recent recovery. They are close enough, she murmured. Kale, they know exactly where our reinforcements are positioned. Look at their formation. They are adjusting already, shifting away from the concentrated defense point. Kale's stomach dropped as he recognized the truth in her observation. The Hollow's forces were indeed shifting their approach, redirecting away from Doran's reinforced position toward a section of wall that had received comparatively lighter defense, a gap in their planning that the enemy had apparently anticipated with unnerving accuracy. They know our positions, Kale said grimly, the earlier concern about a spy within Thorn walls suddenly crystallizing into terrifying immediate relevance. Someone shared our defensive plan before we even finished preparing it. There was no time to fully process the implications of that betrayal, not with the Hollow's forces already adjusting their assault toward the newly exposed vulnerability. Kale shouted rapid orders, warriors scrambling to redirect their positions, the careful preparation of the past hour, suddenly thrown into chaotic improvisation, as the true nature of the threat became devastatingly clear. Alira, get to the sacred den, Kale commanded urgently, his wolf surging forward with protective fury as the first wave of Hollow fighters reached the outer wall. Now. Not without you, she said fiercely, refusing to retreat, even as chaos erupted around them. This is not the time to argue, Kale snapped, though something in her stubborn refusal to abandon him, even in the face of immediate danger, settled deeply into his chest, despite the urgency of the moment. Before either of them could resolve the disagreement, a piercing horn call cut through the night, followed immediately by shouts of alarm from the western wall. The Hollow's third group, previously believed to be the weakest of their divided forces, was mounting a sudden, unexpected assault of its own, catching Kale's already stretched defenses in a coordinated pincer that threatened to overwhelm Thorn's fortifications from two directions simultaneously. Whatever betrayal had leaked their defensive plans to the enemy, it had provided the Hollow with exactly the advantage they needed to turn a difficult confrontation into a potentially devastating rout. And Kale understood, with grim clarity, that the true battle for Thorn territory, and for Alira's continued survival, had only just begun. The western wall buckled under the sudden pressure of the Hollow's second assault, warriors scrambling to reinforce the breach, even as the eastern confrontation continued to rage with brutal intensity. Kale split his attention between both fronts, shouting commands, coordinating his forces with a discipline that fought against the growing chaos threatening to overwhelm his careful preparations. "Doran, hold the eastern line," Kale called out. "I am taking reinforcements west. My king, you cannot split your forces further. We are already stretched too thin." "We have no choice," Kale interrupted grimly. "If the western wall falls, they will be inside our fortress within minutes." He turned to find Alira, already moving toward the western approach, without waiting for his permission, her blade drawn, her expression fierce, with the same determination that had carried her across dangerous wilderness in the days following her pack's destruction. "Alira, I know these tactics better than anyone else defending these walls," she called back over her shoulder. "Let me help, Kale, please." Something in her voice, in the fierce plea beneath her determination, broke through Kale's protective instincts enough to recognize the truth in her words. She had survived exactly this kind of assault before. Her knowledge, her hard-won understanding of the Hollow's methods, could genuinely mean the difference between victory and devastating loss. "Stay close to me," he said finally, falling into step beside her as they raced toward the western wall together. "Whatever happens, we face this together." They reached the breach just as Hollow fighters began pouring through the gap in Thorn's defenses, their movements disciplined and coordinated despite the chaos surrounding them. Kale's wolf surged forward as he engaged the nearest attacker, years of training guiding his movements even as fierce protective fury for Alira colored every strike with additional urgency. Beside him, Alira fought with a controlled precision that spoke of hard experience, her movements economical, each strike calculated to disable, rather than simply overpower. Kale found himself impressed, despite the desperate circumstances, watching her navigate the chaos of battle with the same sharp intelligence she had applied to every challenge since her arrival in his territory. "There," Alira called suddenly, pointing toward a figure standing back from the immediate fighting, directing the Hollow's forces with subtle gestures that marked him clearly as their leader. "That is their commander. If we can reach him, disrupt their coordination, it may turn the tide." Kale followed her gaze, recognizing the truth in her assessment. The Hollow's forces moved with such disciplined precision, specifically because someone was actively directing their movements, adjusting their strategy in real time, based on the shifting battlefield. Removing that central coordination could indeed fracture their otherwise formidable assault into more manageable, disorganized resistance. "Together," Kale said, and together, they began fighting their way through the chaos toward the distant commander, their combined efforts clearing a path through Hollow fighters, who found themselves unprepared for the ferocious coordination between the Alpha King and the Survivor, who had already outmaneuvered their organization once before. They were perhaps 20 feet from their target when a new figure emerged from the shadows near the breach, moving with familiar purpose that made Kale's blood run cold with sudden, devastating recognition. Councilman Brandt, weapon drawn, positioned not to defend the wall, but to intercept them before they could reach the Hollow's commander. "Brandt," Kale said, disbelief and fury warring in his voice. "What is this?" "Simple pragmatism, my king," Brandt said, his expression cold and calculating, in a way Kale had never witnessed before, despite years of political disagreement between them. The Hollow offered generous terms in exchange for information, territory, resources. Far more than your leadership has ever offered those of us who question your judgment. "You betrayed our entire kingdom," Alira said, her voice carrying disgust and fury in equal measure. "For personal gain. I secured a future for myself, regardless of who ultimately holds this throne," Brandt replied, raising his weapon with grim determination. "And I cannot allow either of you to reach their commander now, not when I have already invested so much in ensuring their success tonight." The confrontation that followed was brief but vicious, Brandt's betrayal lending desperate strength to his attacks, even as Kale and Alira fought together, with the fluid coordination that had already carried them through so much of the chaotic battle surrounding them. Kale's wolf raged at the betrayal, fury lending speed and precision to every strike, while Alira moved to cover his flank, her blade finding openings that Brant's desperate defense left exposed. The confrontation ended with Brant disarmed and restrained, his betrayal exposed, before witnesses who would ensure the council understood exactly what had transpired within their own ranks. But the delay had cost them precious time, and by the moment they turned back toward the Hollow's commander, he had already noticed the disruption and was rapidly redirecting his forces toward a full withdrawal. "They are retreating," Alira said, watching the Hollow's fighters begin pulling back from the breach with the same disciplined coordination that had marked their initial assault. "Something has changed their calculation." "Perhaps they realize their inside advantage has been neutralized," Kale said, though something in the too orderly withdrawal troubled him deeply. The Hollow did not strike him as an organization prone to abandoning an assault simply because one traitor had been captured. There was something more calculated in their retreat, something that suggested this confrontation had never been their true objective at all. The realization struck both of them simultaneously, their eyes meeting with sudden, shared alarm. "The sacred den," Alira breathed. "This was never truly about breaching your walls, Kale. This was a distraction, meant to draw every available defender toward the outer fortifications while—" She did not finish the thought, already turning and racing back toward the fortress interior, Kale close behind her, both of them driven by the same terrible understanding. Whatever the Hollow truly sought, whatever artifact remained hidden somewhere within Thorn territory, they had used this elaborate assault not to conquer the fortress directly, but to create exactly the chaos and diversion necessary to search for it unopposed, while every warrior's attention remained fixed on the walls. They reached the tunnel leading toward the sacred den, to find the guards positioned there lying unconscious on the stone floor, and beyond them, the ancient gate standing open once more, the pale silver light within flickering unnaturally, as though something had disturbed the delicate balance the chamber had maintained for 60 years. "No," Alira whispered, horror washing over her features, as she rushed forward into the chamber that had once offered her sanctuary, now potentially violated by the very threat she had fled across dangerous wilderness to escape. Whatever waited within the sacred den's ancient walls, Kale understood, with grim certainty, that the true battle for Thorn territory, and for whatever secret the mountain itself had chosen to protect, was only now truly beginning. Inside the sacred den, a single figure stood at the center of the chamber, studying the ancient stone walls with careful, deliberate attention. He turned as Kale and Alira burst through the entrance, his expression calm despite the sudden intrusion, and Kale recognized immediately, from the disciplined bearing and cold assessing eyes, that this was no ordinary Hollow fighter, but their commander himself. "Alira of Ferris," the man said, his voice carrying quiet, unsettling satisfaction. "I wondered how long it would take you to find your way back to this chamber. It seems this mountain has been protecting more than just your safety these past days." "Get away from there," Alira said fiercely, positioning herself between the commander and the deeper recesses of the chamber, though Kale could see uncertainty in her expression, as though she did not fully understand what the man was searching for. "You do not even know what you are protecting, do you?" the commander said, something almost pitying in his tone. "Your Alpha kept his people remarkably ignorant, considering what your pack's founders actually hid away centuries ago." He gestured toward the chamber's deepest wall, where Kale now noticed, for the first time, faint carvings barely visible beneath the strange silver light, symbols that matched nothing in Thorn's own history. "The Ferris pack and Thorn pack share an older bond than either bloodline remembers," the commander continued. "Founded by siblings, centuries ago, who split their inheritance between two territories to protect it from those who would misuse its power. Your sacred den and the chamber beneath Alira's elder hall were never separate secrets, Alpha King. They were two halves of the same protection, waiting for the day both bloodlines might finally reunite." Kale's mind raced, pieces of ancient legend and recent devastating events suddenly aligning with terrible clarity. The gate that had remained sealed for 60 years, opening specifically for Alira. His wolf's immediate, overwhelming recognition of her as something precious beyond simple attraction. It was not merely a mate bond his instincts had recognized that first night, but something deeper, tied to bloodlines and ancient promises neither of them had known existed. You destroyed my entire pack, Alira said, her voice shaking with barely controlled fury. Searching for something that was never truly hidden in my territory at all, but split between two kingdoms, neither of us understood we were connected to. A necessary sacrifice, the commander said coldly. The power contained within this reunion, should both halves ever be brought together by the rightful bloodlines, represents a threat too significant to allow into the hands of those unprepared to control it. My organization exists precisely to prevent such catastrophic reunions, regardless of the cost required. And yet your search led you directly here, Kale said, understanding dawning with grim clarity. Led by the very reunion you sought to prevent, because Alira's arrival triggered exactly the response your organization feared most. The commander's expression tightened, the first crack in his composed demeanor. The sacred den should not have opened for her. That variable was not accounted for in our calculations. Because you failed to understand what the bond truly meant, Alira said, stepping forward with newfound understanding, steadying her voice, despite the danger still radiating from the commander's controlled stillness. This was never about an artifact to be stolen and controlled. It was about two bloodlines finding their way back to each other, exactly as the original founders intended. Kale felt something shift within him as she spoke, his wolf responding with fierce, unmistakable certainty to the truth unfolding before them. Whatever ancient power the ancient founders had split between their two territories, it had waited centuries for exactly this moment, for a Thorn Alpha and a Ferris survivor to stand together within the chamber, meant to reunite what had been divided. You cannot stop what has already begun, Kale said, moving to stand beside Alira, their shoulders nearly touching as they faced the Hollow's commander together. Whatever your organization fears, the reunion you sought to prevent has already occurred, the moment she stepped through that gate 3 nights ago. The commander's composure finally cracked fully, calculating coldness giving way to something closer to desperate urgency. He lunged toward the carved wall, clearly intending some final, drastic action to prevent whatever completion the ancient chamber now seemed poised to achieve. But Alira moved faster, years of survival instinct honed sharp by recent devastating experience carrying her forward to intercept him before he could reach the ancient carvings. Kale joined her a heartbeat later, and together they subdued the Hollow's commander with the same fluid coordination that had carried them through the chaos of the earlier battle, their combined strength finally proving more than sufficient against a single opponent, however skilled and however desperate. As the commander was restrained and led away by guards summoned from the ongoing cleanup outside, Kale and Alira remained within the sacred den, both of them breathing hard from the confrontation, both of them acutely aware of the strange, ancient energy, now humming more strongly than ever through the chamber's silver light. It is done, Alira said quietly, studying the carved wall with wonder, replacing the fear that had gripped her only moments before. Whatever the founders intended, whatever bond our bloodlines were meant to share, it has finally been fulfilled. Kale turned to face her fully, his wolf settling into a deep, contented calm unlike anything he had experienced before, even in the days since first finding her sleeping on this very stone floor. I do not fully understand everything that has happened tonight, he admitted. But I understand this much. Whatever ancient purpose brought you to this chamber, whatever ancient bond my wolf recognized before either of us understood its true nature, I do not regret a single moment of the journey that led us here. Alira's expression softened, the wariness that had defined her since waking, finally giving way to something warmer, something that mirrored the steady certainty growing in Kale's own chest. Neither do I, she said quietly. Though I never expected to find a new home, and perhaps something more than a home, in the very chamber that first offered me sanctuary. Outside, the fortress slowly settled from the chaos of battle into the quiet relief of survival, warriors tending wounds and securing captured Hollow fighters, the immediate threat finally, decisively repelled. Word would spread quickly through the northern territories of Thorn's victory, of the betrayal exposed within their own council, and of the strange, ancient reunion that had unfolded within the sacred den that had waited 60 years to open its gate again. But within the chamber itself, none of that mattered as much as the quiet moment shared between an Alpha King and the survivor his wolf had refused to let sleep unprotected, both of them finally understanding the true depth of the bond that had brought them together, both of them ready to face whatever future awaited them, together, as the ancient prophecy had always intended. The sacred den, its ancient purpose finally fulfilled, settled into a peaceful stillness it had not known in generations, its silver light glowing softly around the two figures standing together at its heart. A new beginning, quietly taking root, where an old legend had finally found its true and lasting completion.